Hi. So my question is, are you a radical pedagogue? Now, I think probably most of you are. So really, my talk is to present the idea of take you through the diagnostic process, really. So I wonder, have you ever woken up thinking, I might be a radical pedagogue? Well, the symptoms are complex. It could be the feeling that you're inquisitive, that you're innovative, that you're a collaborator, that you're desperate to understand what harmonic tectonics might actually mean on a daily basis. These are the early symptoms, in fact. So if you think you have these symptoms, this is going to be an interesting 10, 15 minutes. So it brings me to my question about why education should be radical. Is education displaying symptoms of radicalism? I think that it is. So to start with, what on earth does radical really mean? Well, firstly, it comes from the ancient Greek. And starting with pedagogy. Pedagogy is actually means the leader of children. So it used to be the slaves and the employees who took children to school. So that's the first thing. But in education, we don't really see pedagogy anymore as being just about leadership. We see it as being something much more complicated. And in fact, it can encompass all kinds of learning methodologies and models, so collaborative and interdisciplinary and problem-based learning and so on. So it's a very, very complex tree of possibilities now within education. And radical actually comes from the word radicalis, which is the Latin for root. So it's what's the heart of the matter, what we are really good at, who we are as individuals on a fundamental basis. And obviously, the word radical has kind of been hijacked a bit, so we see it's being something about a protest, about a reaction to things, and that can be a good thing. So if you think, what is the profile then of a radical pedagogue, it's probably someone who is obviously a bit of a rebel, wears a bit of leather, likes to react against things, thinks there might be other ways of doing things, but certainly likes to explore the possibilities of that. So this is going to be your little test to see whether or not you are a radical pedagogue. I suspect you are. Firstly, are you a maggot? Now, being a maggot is actually quite a cool thing because maggots take something like an education system that's got a whole bunch of flaws in it, and they kind of chew it up and they think about ways that they can take that organic matter and repurpose it creatively. And maybe you do that in your job, perhaps. So the other question is, are you a washing machine? Now, washing machines are a wonderful piece of technology because the engines that power washing machines are actually directly derived from jet engines. So it's a simple transposition of technology. So, for example, if you're at work and you realise, hey, I'm doing these things that I could do in any other field or in other areas, not just necessarily the discipline or the context in which I'm working, you're probably exhibiting washing machine jet engine behaviours. And why that's interesting is, if you look at the way in which we are constantly in jobs whose definition, whose skill sets are on the move, then actually if you've got the behaviours of a washing machine, you're going to be more able to adapt to the changing conditions of your employment, of your profession. So the other question is about where you learn what you use in work. Well, in an education system, we like to think that sometimes it's about what we're taught in school, that's what's going to set us up for life in terms of how we learn and how we become professionals and succeed. But actually, I think a radical pedagogue is somebody who probably didn't learn most of the stuff they're using every day in school. They've learned it in work, or they've learned it in all kinds of conversations and all kinds of locations. And in fact, radical pedagogues are the sort of people like you are who've come out of work today to come here, learn something else because you believe that the conversations you're going to hear today are going to enrich what you do regardless of the context in which you're operating. And actually, radical pedagogues like to be critical. And obviously I'm a Brit, so I moan about everything. But I don't mean critical in just a moany kind of way. It's because actually that isn't enough. It's about being critical in a propositional kind of a way. And all the kind of theorists who are radical pedagogues, the Freire's and everybody else, they all think, critical pedagogy is the way forward. But they're not just talking about criticising education. They're saying, okay, being critical but propositional, seeing what the possibilities are. And another thing you might feel if you're a radical pedagogue is that you don't just see education as a one-way street. You don't see it as a kind of a payment transaction. I pay a bunch of fees, somebody teaches me about my subject area. What you actually find is that you want to be part of that conversation about what the content is. So it's not a one-way street. it's you a co-creator of your learning experience, not just a consumer. And at the moment, in the way in which education is becoming increasingly commercialised, this is a really important point, and it's certainly how it's going to change. So another thing you might find is that you're not necessarily that productive if you're under extreme duress. So why should schools and universities, if they're under some sort of industry-led agenda about skill sets, why should they necessarily be very productive? If you're telling young people, we want you to change the future of your profession, but we want you to do that by just learning these things that we figured out that you need to know for industry, how can you then innovate if you're not being given the freedom to actually imagine alternative possibilities? So a TEDx talk is really a Radical Pedagogues Skunkworks project, and that's nothing to do with smoking anything illegal. It's actually a term used to describe a group of people who come together, who share ideas in a propositional, generative and imaginative way to imagine new kinds of learning opportunities. So really radical pedagogy is not just about teaching. It's much more about who we are. It comes back to the root of who we are as individuals, but also our power collectively. It allows us all to reimagine, to rethink, and to apply new meanings to knowledge, co-author new ideas, to innovate, to bring more of ourselves into our learning experience, and to think and do, and obviously find the leading edge. So, in other words, this place outside of what is mainstream and orthodox to imagine new possibilities for education, but by implication for industry as well. And that means realising potential and creating meaning and value, not just consuming it. Thank you very much, and build on.